And she is someone whose work sits right at the intersection of accessibility, equitable leadership, and operational clarity. Now, she is a disability inclusion and accessibility advocate who leads with both strategy and her experience, her understanding that she has gained from her lived experience. She serves as the founder and chair of the Disability Inclusion and Accessibility ERG at Higher Heroes USA, where she drives organizational wide belonging, equitable workforce practices, and culture transformation. Additionally, she contributes at the governance level as board member and governance chair for Creative Community Services, where she supports individuals with developmental disabilities and mental health needs. She is known for taking what many organizations treat as abstract DEI concepts. She turns them into practical operational systems that actually work for a lot of people. Her writing and frameworks have helped leaders rethink how they design roles, communication, and workflows so that accessibility isn't just an afterthought. It's actually embedded in organizations. She's the creator of the Accommodation Workflow Toolkit, and this is a 41-page practical guide that helps teams diagnose why approved accommodations break down in real operations, and you discover how to fix those gaps. So you would really want to check that out over there on Gumroad. And of course, her link will be attached to this podcast, so you'll be able to find that link right there and grab that. All right, so I'm excited for this conversation because Miss April Ogden, she brings a grounded, systems-focused perspective that connects policy behavior and day-to-day execution in a way that nobody else does this. Nobody else does this like April Ogden, and I'm really pleased that she is here with us today. Welcome again, April. It's great to have you.
Thank you so much. Thank you. I love that welcoming. I love it. Thank you so much.
Well deserved, well deserved. All right, so let's start here. All right, now you are a disability inclusion and accessibility advocate. In your work,
Yes.
what practical behaviors tell you whether an organization is genuinely inclusive versus they're just being simply compliant? I'd love to hear your thoughts on that, April.
Okay, I'm definitely going to share it a little bit just for just clarification. So, yeah, I do serve as an ERG for a nonprofit organization. And today I'm just going to be talking about my own freelance consulting that I do. But so the freelance consulting, I'm able to talk to more individuals in the different communities and globally. But to answer your question, I want to make sure I'm being clear. so many companies, they will focus on the accommodation sides of things. And
Mm.
what helps me to see if a company is truly what they say they are is that they are able to work outside of policy. And what I mean by that is that it's not just about what we have on paper, but it's how we're executing the policy, the accommodation throughout the day-to-day workflow. And I'm going to give you one quick example. So, for example, we're going to use someone who's neurodivergent. That accommodation is approved. Maybe they need some extra time, some isolation during assessments, things like that, and it's approved. The supervisor is aware of it, but now there's a training, testing is involved, and that testing coordinator has no idea that this person needs these different accommodations. And so there's a gap there. There's a gap between policy and accessibility. And I like to pride myself on, I bridge the gap between policy, people, and accessibility, because that's one way we need to be proactive rather than reactive. And we need to think about policy not as an accommodation, but operational day-to-day workflow. How do we implement that for the person with a disability?
Awesome, awesome. And it's always great to hear, yeah, just how well you get into these insights, April, which is why
Thank you.
it's great to be able to talk to you today. All right, so building on that, from your experience supporting leaders, which has been really extensive, how do you actually help them build clarity around their roles, expectations, and communication so that people with disabilities can fully participate in day-to-day operations?
Well, I'm going to kind of jump ahead. I'm going to answer that question. I believe that companies really should, and this is just like free advice, develop cross-functional support teams. So what is a cross-functional support team? That is where we may have our HR leader, our operations manager, our IT, our training and development, and any other stakeholder. So we need to talk about what we're expecting from individuals. We need to develop specific plans based on the individual need, and we need to make sure that everyone's involved within the whole organization. And we figure out how we're going to make this work, that day-to-day workflow, so that all those things you just named, those are implemented, automatically executed when we have that cross-functional support team.
Awesome. All right, I love that. Now, when you look at how teams collaborate, what would you say? What operational habits consistently support inclusive workflows and actually reduce these unintentional barriers?
Feedback loops. So when we have individuals with disabilities, we don't want to just again implement, execute. We also want to get the feedback from the individual, like, "Hey, April, we implemented this. Is this working for you? How can we improve it? What have you experienced? What barriers have you experienced?" And a lot of times the person with the individual with the disability already has a solution. You just are giving them that permission to give you feedback. And that's what a lot of people with disabilities, there's a fear about giving feedback and also being reprimanded for giving feedback.
Awesome. Excellent. All right. And I do appreciate that, April. Can you probably share an example, of, how you have seen this communicate? Yeah. Can you share an example?
Survey, for example, meetings. Meetings is one area, whether it's a team meeting, individual one-to-one with a supervisor or a people leader. I've seen it where meetings have not been accessible. For example, something as simple as an agenda before the meeting. And having that feedback, because I work with a client and they gave their supervisor that feedback, like I have to have an agenda. When we finish our meeting, I really need to have what we talked about, have it written down, because everyone processes information differently. But again, when a company opens it up, whether it's on a quarterly basis or semi-annual or annual, whatever the rhythm is, allowing that person with a disability to give that feedback so you can improve your operations within a team environment, that will help tremendously. I hope I answered your question. Did I answer your
Very
question?
well, very well.
Okay.
And this is why
Get a
I
little
asked
excited.
I asked for the example because I knew that you have so much to share, and there you have answered and you have given, great recommendations there. So thank you for sharing that,
Okay, you're
April.
welcome.
All
Mhm.
right. Now, so in your work with accessibility and equitable leadership, how do you see, for example, small operational decisions, meeting formats, communication style, documentation? How do these actually impact those who have diverse needs? You just mentioned
Yeah.
in the example, but then
Hmm.
you can extend on this.
I would say when small businesses, because here in the United States, I'll give an example. Our accommodations, how people qualify for accommodations. Sometimes it may be a small company, and they necessarily don't follow up on the guidelines. For whatever reason, sometimes a company is so small. Let's just say it's a team of five, and by the definition itself, you need to have a certain amount of individuals to say, okay, this should be an ADA accommodation. Where small companies miss out is a lot of them assume that maybe I don't fall up on the specific ADA accommodations, but where they miss out is that there's often a lack of communication.
Yeah.
And when it comes to products, like whether it's your website, whether it's a document, whether it's even how we're doing our agenda, everyone's going to have different needs. And
Mhm.
this is why when you go back to that cross-functional support team, that's why it's important to develop one, because even within a small environment, you may have an advisory board. Maybe you don't have enough funding for that, but you have an advisory board with all of these different individuals. But this is what's going to help you as a small company to understand the individual needs, because everyone has those individual needs. And just because you as a small company may not fall up under certain guidelines, you still want to be proactive rather than reactive, and you do want to be empathetic because each person is going to have a need. And
Mhm.
that's where I come in at, even like with the small companies, mid-size and the large corporations.
Yeah.
I will help them to develop some ways to be more inclusive in their day-to-day operations.
Awesome. Love that. Love that.
Mm-hmm.
All right. And then this is of course where your freelance focus is mainly
Mm-hmm.
on as well. You mentioned you want to share a little bit about how your freelance actually helps these companies, your freelance consultations.
Yeah, I'll go in and I'll do an assessment. I'll usually talk with some of the people managers. I'll talk with HR. Sometimes we'll have other individuals a part of those teams, whether it's other stakeholders. But we sit down and talk about some of the barriers that they have. I'll do an assessment, and
Yeah.
then I'll come up with some solutions. And then we talk about how we implement those solutions. But also, I want to say is the individual is always a part of the person with a disability. If it's a isolated case, I'm always going to ask to get the feedback from that individual. If it's overall a company, just say, hey, April, we really need to improve
Mhm.
how we are, outside of policy, how we're implementing accommodations. And we've never heard of operational accessibility, because that's a term I coined. Operational accessibility is working outside of just policy and
Yeah.
making sure that day-to-day workflow. So we start talking about workflows. We start talking about accommodations. What are some resources to help, even for the small mom and pop stores, or companies rather. I will even talk about some low cost or no cost ways.
Mhm.
But it's all about helping them to develop solutions to be more inclusive.
Excellent, excellent. And that's really great work there, April. And I
Mm-hmm.
do hope that a lot more companies will be actually able to engage with your services
Yes.
because they are so much very well needed. All right,
Mm-hmm.
so let's continue. We're doing really great so far. So
Mm-hmm.
then there's the reality of change. So when
Mm.
organizations are navigating change or growth, What simple practices helps leaders maintain accessibility and inclusion without actually slowing down execution?
Oh my goodness. There is something called resistance. And
Mm,
sometimes you have some stakeholders that are resistant to change. And we have to help them to understand that there's a business side of this and
yes.
that it could cost whether, and I hate saying the word lawsuit, but it could cost.
Mhm.
I've seen sometimes something as a simple solution that probably costs less than $500 and probably less than that. And there was resistance. And then there was a complaint. And that complaint costs thousands of dollars. And it doesn't have to go that way. Now, I am under the belief, I really do believe that companies want to do the right thing. But where the barrier comes in is that there's not enough training. People are not one foundation is prove what you do. And
Yes.
so that's where that gap comes in at. And I know like here in the United States, once for example, our EEOC guidelines or there's a complaint through the EEOC, there's often training that's asked to be had. So you didn't win your lawsuit. Now EEOC is saying this is what we recommend, and great majority of the time it is training. And so if we can be proactive rather than reactive,
Mhm.
and we can get the training so we can face the resistance and people understand how it impacts the mind, the turnover, the morale, all of that. If we can do that, then I think we'll see a reduction in complaints and we'll see a lot more of operational accessibility executed in day-to-day workflow.
I love that. I love that. I love that. Great
Okay.
recommendations, April. Really great and strong recommendations. You're sharing there. Because
Thank you.
you have really right. You're given the balance between speed and actually equity, which is something so many leaders wrestle with. So,
Yeah.
really happy for that. And then finally, let's look at this. So looking ahead, what shifts do you believe organizations will actually need to make in order to build operational systems that are
Mm-hmm.
truly inclusive for people with disabilities? I'd love to hear your forward-looking view on this.
Mm-hmm. I think companies, especially when we start adding in AI, that's just honestly like a whole nother topic. But I think companies are really going to move forward with saying we're not going to wait on policy. We're not going to wait on an accommodation approval. We are going to be proactive. We are going to develop these stakeholder cross-functional support teams. That's what I think companies are going to move forward in doing. That's really what I think the trend, because when we're adding in, I'm going to mention it briefly, but when we're adding in things like AI, and we have all these different teams, and now, for example, if you purchase someone assistive technology and you're implementing AI, no one knows what to do. And that's going to slow down workflow. It's going to be a barrier for the individual. And people are going to say, hey, look, I think we need to be more proactive. We need to develop a system
Yeah.
so that we can avoid these barriers. And I think more, and this is my hope, but I really do think we're going to start moving into cross-functional support teams that
Mhm.
include a number of people that will impact that person with a disability and their experience, their employee experience. And I'm already seeing it now where people are to start talking about accessibility outside of policy and operational workflow.
Yes, yes, definitely. We encourage persons to purchase your book. but I want them to hear it directly from you. Tell them the great
Okay.
insights that they will actually gain
Oh,
from.
when So in that book, there are scripts like on how to talk about your accommodation if it's not working. Because in my inbox within LinkedIn, I'm constantly getting, I was let go, I was terminated, or I'm heavily stressed. I have this accommodation and my manager isn't really giving me what I need. Well, inside of this book, you're going to get the scripts, you're going to get information. I'm going to ask you a lot of questions. I'm going to give you a lot of information, what to say to your manager. I'm really going to help the individual connect like, hey, how do I get this to work for me every day by all members of the team? We're going to talk about how to do that. There will even be some times where we got to take a different route, and maybe talking to your manager may not be the way to go, and we'll start talking about how do we bring some of those other stakeholders in. But it is currently up until June 25th, 11:59 for your listeners that use the Allison 2026, no spaces in between that. It is 50% off.
Right.
And so I encourage everyone to go in and test it out. And I would love your testimony because it is a very helpful guide. It's something I wish I would have had myself. I could have been a little bit more independent and less stressed as I was going through the accommodation process.
Definitely, April. And I'm so glad that you're actually the person to put together this book because, myself, and others, we have heard so much about, your experience, your testimonies as it relates to, having to
Mm-hmm.
navigate the challenges. So it's really great that you're able to share
Thank
this
you.
and also give back to helping others who need this, not just because you're putting together a book, but because you have
Right.
lived this experience and now
Oh,
you're
yeah.
helping others. So I want to say thank you so much again, April.
Thank
We're at
you.
the end of our interview, but
Okay.
it has been
Thank you.
really exceptional having you here. And thank you for your time. We do appreciate it.